Hello everybody, this is a tutorial for Geography HL topics. So now we're going to talk about the first topic of the Geography, IB Geography HL topic. So the first topic of IB Geography HL is measuring global interactions. So it's also under the broad topic of, global interactions. And okay. So first chapter, is global participation, actually. But before we go over that, we will start with IB Prepared Geography because this book is really good. So if you can buy it, you can buy it on IBO.org, the official website. And this book, now we're going to start reading these. You should be able to, so we can know what are the things we have to absolutely know about before getting into the chapter so that we can know which parts to focus on. Okay. So measuring global interactions, you should be able to describe and evaluate one of the following two globalization indices, the AT-Kearney index or the COF index as a measure of global interaction. So of the AT-Kearney index and COF index, we'll go over that later. So now we have to describe and evaluate. So what does that mean? We have to know what each of the index has for their categories. What parts of globalization do they observe? And we also have to evaluate, talk about hey, what's the strength and limitation for AT-Kearney index? And what's the strength and limitation for, what are the strength and limitations for the COF index? Okay. And we have to describe how the globalization index may be represented spatially. So what does that mean? Spatial is like space, right? So that means usually because AT-Kearney index and COF index, like these globalization indices, they of course observe the world as a whole, right? Like each of the countries. So naturally, each of these countries will have different indices, the different scores or different values of index. So you should also be able to represent one of these indices on a global scale. So for example, like this. For this AT-Kearney index, you should be when you want to represent it spatially, you should be able to draw one of these, or for the COF index, you should be able to show something like that. This is spatial. You have to represent them in a global scale, like each of the countries, and compare them, and to show just give a general global picture of the indices. Okay. So evaluate here is a high order term. So you're expected to make a judgment by weighing up the strengths and limitations. Yeah, as I've said. So are all the components that make up the index equally weighted? Because sometimes they tend to overly focus on one thing and tend to kind of overlook some things that are really important actually. The indices can be shown in map format, as in the case of the COF index, or as a series of compound bar charts, as in the Kearney index. You just saw that, right? Like Kearney index is in bar graph. This is how it's represented spatially in a diagram, and here is like in a map. The COF index is in a map. Okay. So there is no requirement to do both. So when you're preparing for the IB exam, especially for these chapters, just in case you will encounter a question that answers this, then just really memorize one of them in detail. Okay, really carefully. Okay, and what else are you supposed to do? Discuss the spatial pattern of global interactions through the mapping of core areas and the focus of interaction, network hubs or nodes, the peripheries and areas relatively unaffected by these interactions. So the core and periphery, we will go over that later. So it's basically about, there's a center core, and periphery is basically surrounding countries. So it's talking about a major centered countries and then other countries surrounding it. Whether physically, geographically, or socially, politically. So we'll talk about it later. And there are a number of ways of describing core and peripheries. Okay, the most frequently used is Wallerstein's world system analysis, which we will talk about in this tutorial. And it divides the world into cores, semi-periphery, and periphery. So all the countries in the world are divided into these three categories. Okay. And there's also Friedman's world city hypothesis. Well, so earlier, the Wallerstein's world system analysis, talking about, each of the country of the world, but now this one is focusing on the cities. So it divides the major cities of the world into core and periphery, each containing primary and secondary cities. Okay. And we're going to talk about it later. So now these are the terms you have to absolutely remember. You can memorize them if you want, but try to just make sure when you write the essay, you can define these terms, because the good essay, usually in the introduction, it's assumed that you already know these key terms. Okay, so core and periphery, the concept of a developed core surrounded by an undeveloped periphery. Of course, the core is usually talking about like more economically developed countries who have better conditions, financial conditions, other environmental conditions than the other peripheral countries like surrounding it. Like, there's United States, and maybe like, for example, like Mexico could be United States, or, there are other, like geographically, Mexico could be, because a lot of migrant workers from Mexico are actually going into the United States. But then for those not in social terms, a lot of countries are periphery to US in a way, because in we have these like film culture, Hollywood and stuff. So in a way, US is definitely a core, and other peripheral countries are the ones who are influenced by it. Okay. And this concept can be applied at various scales, just like the Wallerstein and the fragments. It could be divided by cities, New York and other small cities around it, and or like US and like other smaller like countries that are affected by it, so the core and periphery. Okay, so you have to know that. And globalization, this is the really important part. Okay, globalization is the growing interdependence of countries worldwide through the increasing volume and variety of cross-border transactions in goods and services of international capital flows, and through the more rapid and widespread diffusion of technology. So what are the key terms? First, cross-border transactions. That's globalization, right? Globalization is brought forth because of people trading with each other. And what happens when you trade? There are international capital flows. When the trade becomes bigger, you start, making, there are money going back and forth among the countries. And also there's the widespread diffusion of technology. We text, through the internet, we can talk to people. Like, now I'm in, China, I can talk to somebody like from my own homeland, like Korea, and I can also talk to somebody from US, my friend in US. Okay. And there's like globalization indices. The AT-Kearney Foreign Seed Index measures 12 variables, which are subdivided into 4 baskets. Economic integration, personal contact, technological connectivity, and political engagement. Nations are ranked according to a calculated globalization index. Okay, so that's one of the globalization indices. I'll talk about it right now. Okay, so now we're gonna go over here. This book is really useful. It's from Geography, study guide. It's a study guide, like shortened version of the Oxford book. Try to get this. So anyways, we're going to use this right now. So we already know that these are the things that we have to know about. And here, globalization indices, we have to, memorize one of them, right? So first one we're going to tackle is the AT-Kearney index. By the way, these are like some of the definitions over here. You definitely have to understand these concepts, what do they mean, so you can use them in writing the essay on your paper 3, but then you don't necessarily have to memorize them. But, if you know these, then try to just go over it, read them, understand them, okay? So now we're going to talk about the AT-Kearney index in detail, okay? First, AT-Kearney index, what you have to know, this is useful to know about it, this statistic. The 72 countries ranked in the 2007 Globalization Index, the AT-Kearney Index, account for 97% of the world's GDP. That's like almost the entire GDP, right? And 88% of the world's population. So, of course, 88% of the population is a lot, but then all those who are ranked in globalization index, all those who are involved in globalization, they can tend to create more products. Because GDP is, like the value of all final goods and services produced within the nation. So the more you're involved in globalization, it could kind of show a pattern, like the more, the more you produce, like your production increases. Okay, so these are the 4 major brackets for the AT-Kearney index. political engagement is over, including foreign aid, treaties, organization, and peacekeeping. So it's actually, the definition you have to remember is it includes each country's membership in a variety of representative international organizations. So what matters is that whether you're involved in an international organization or not. Okay. So that's the political engagement part. And there's also technological connectivity, including number of internet users, hosts, and secure servers. So it's like how many people use internet, you know. So technological connectivity is also including the AT Kearney Index because, it's very important. That's how, if, people start trading, if they want to, foreign direct investment, if they want to invest in another country, then they tend to have to communicate using these. And globalization, like culturally, the more we interact with each other, the more we share these things on the internet, whether by, news, website, media, or like chattings. The more we can interact. And also like personal contact, that's the chatting part. Is kind of like overlapping with technological connectivity, but here is like kind of separated into categories. So like personal contact, including telephone calls, travels, and remittances. So it's like telecom traffic, how much calls are incoming or outcoming, and how many, people are interacting, and also how many people travel to another country. And remittances is, how when migrant workers, let's say like Mexican workers, go work in the United States and they send back the money to their family in Mexico, right? So that money is called the remittance. So by observing the remittances, we can see how many migrant workers are in another place and how the two countries are economically connected, or two or more countries. And economic integration, including international trade and foreign direct investment. That's pretty much it. So it's like trade, foreign direct investment, inflows and outflows. Of course, like the travel and tourism over here, like in the, the personal contact, it also has money, right? You spend money outside of your country. So that's also included here. And cross-border remittances. A lot of things overlap. So this is like a bar graph of the entire generalization. Like this. It looks like this. So it's pretty much just showing you how, the indexes are shown. So the resulting data for the given variable are then normalized. That means they're like standard, made to be on the same scale. They're using the same absolute scale, okay? Through a process that assigns the value of 1 to the highest data, with all the data points valued as fractions of 1. So it's just like, okay, like how 100% is the full mark, full score for a paper. Then like the others are just smaller than 100, right? But then it's like 1 is the perfect, like is the highest globalization scale. So other people has to be smaller than that. What's smaller than 1? Fraction. Again, the base year 1998 in this case is assigned a value of 100. The given variable scale factor for each subsequent year is the percentage growth or decline in the GDP, or population weighted score of the highest data point. So this scale factor, like this 1 thingy, it always changes. It's not always 1. Okay, it is determined by a lot of changes, like decline in GDP or percentage growth, and population. So relative to 100, So globalization index scores for every country and year are derived by summing all indicator scores. So in this case, like if you can see, like globalization score for Singapore to Australia, what's the scale for this? 1,000. Okay, so others are all smaller than 1,000, and here are like this globalization score. This. So AT Kearney Index is actually really easy to remember, the categories and everything. But then, what are the strengths and limitations? Well, I guess the strengths is that it pretty much covers a lot, like the bulk of the essence of globalization. If you talk about these, it focuses on different aspects. And then the limitations, you could say it doesn't focus very much, on each of the indicators. But then because globalization is not only about political engagement, technological connectivity, personal contact, and economic integration, it's also about other things. But for me personally, because IB also requires to let you give like give you like a spatial representation of the globalization index. So I really don't recommend you to choose AT Kearney Index to study upon unless you have more detailed information than this book. I actually prefer the COF index. So we will continue that in the next video. Okay, so now we'll continue from what we have left off. So the second index of globalization is the COF index of globalization. So it was introduced in 2002. And wait, okay. So the COF index measures the three main dimensions of globalization: economic, political, or social. So it's like economic dimension, political dimension, and social dimension. And nations are ranked accordingly. So it was introduced in 2002 by the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology on a yearly basis. I don't think you have to know about that, but yeah, remember it's divided into economic, political, and social. Okay. Before we go over these three dimensions in detail, we should first see how the COF defines the globalization. So it defines the globalization as the process of creating networks of connections among actors at multi-continental distances, mediated through a variety of flows, including people, information, ideas, capital, and goods. Okay, so this definition, you don't necessarily have to memorize it, but then I guess it's useful if you can, if it's not too much to memorize, so you can use it in your essay, when you evaluate the COF index. First you have to describe it, and while you're describing it, providing definitions for it, other than introducing the three dimensions that are most important, you can also say how it defines the globalization. So what are the keywords? So globalization is like the creating networks of connections. Networks of connections is mostly about connections, networks of connections among actors in multi-continental distances, so different distances far away, and it's a lot through like people, information, ideas, capital, and goods. Okay, globalization is conceptualized as a process that erodes national boundaries, integrates national economies, cultures, technologies, and governance, and produces complex relations of mutual interdependence. Okay, so more specifically, so the three dimensions of COP index. So it's defined as like economic globalization. So what's economic globalization? Characterized as a long distance flows of goods, capital, and services. So that's kind of similar to the economic integration in the 80 current index, and capital and services, as well as information and perceptions that accompany market changes. So it's not only about the money anymore, the goods, capital, services. It's also about how, your ideas change, your upcoming market changes. Like the McDonald, that's actually related to globalization over here. It just says that a product is more likely to succeed when it adapts to the locality or a distinct culture. So like the transformation of McDonald's, or like how the introduction, it could like the introduction of Western food into China has certainly made this people to be more used to the Western food. The younger generations are more and more enjoying, the more and more younger generation people are enjoying Western food. So that's one of the information perception that accompany market changes, like for Western food. And political globalization, characterized by a diffusion of government policies. That's actually over here. So it's also talking about the UN. And also like social globalization, expressed as the spread of ideas, information, images, and people. So it's more about the mind, right? Ideas, information, images, and people. So in addition to these are the three main dimensions, right? There are also sub-indices referring to actual academic flows, academic restrictions, data on information flows, data on personal contact, and data on cultural proximity. Okay, so earlier I said you can just remember one of the two globalization indices, but then and I suggest you to remember this one. It is good if you remember this, like it has a lot of sub-indices related to these, like different subdivisions of economic dimension, because you can actually compare it with the 80 Kearney index to talk about these when you're talking about the COF index strengths. So that's why you don't necessarily have to memorize very in great detail about the 80 Kearney index, but it's helpful if you know about it. Just keep it in your pocket in case you use it. Okay, so also and the 2008 index, they introduced an updated version of the original index, employing more recent data that had been available previously. So it's very good. It's updated, and it includes more and more data every day. So that's a good thing. Okay, so this is a spatial representation of COF index, the globalization index on a map. Also, another reason I want you to memorize the COF index than the other one is because it's easier to remember. The bar graph, it's harder to draw it on the paper. You don't necessarily have to draw it, but it's better if you can conceptualize it, know it. So when the cough index is like more than 80, it's like obviously the North American continents, this is like Canada. I guess Canada is very globalized, and these are like parts of Europe, especially the Western Europe, are very globalized, most globalized. And 60 to 80, yeah, there's definitely America, and there's like Alaska, part of America, and the Russia, China is also very globalized, and also here is Australia. Okay, uh, and the Middle East, yeah, some countries in the Middle East are pretty globalized too. They have constant transactions, and also like next to that, like 40 to 60, that's like next to them. Also like here, Mexico, some countries in South America, like Chile, Argentina, and yeah, uh, okay, yeah, you can just gather the picture, okay? So know about these. And academic globalization, broadly speaking, academic globalization has two dimensions. First, actual academic flows. Okay, so that's good. So academic dimension is divided, other than the subdivide indices, mainly is like first, actual academic flows, like the money that are tangible made. And second, restrictions to trade and capital. So we don't just observe how much money is going and, going in and going out, back and forth. We also see what kind of like economic policies are there to trade, restrictions to trade and capital. And political globalization uses the number of embassies and high commissions in a country, the number of international organizations to which the country is a member. Well, that's actually pretty same. It's very similar to the political engagement party over here, but then it's better because it's not only considering about how many organizations, international organizations, the country is participating in. It also considers, how many embassies, high commissions in a country, and also the number of UN peace missions a country has participated in. So it's much more detailed. And social globalization, classifies social globalization in three categories. So over here, so first, like personal contacts, includes international telecom traffic, outgoing traffic in minutes per subscriber, and the degree of tourism, travel a country's population is exposed to. Government and workers' transfers received and paid as a percent of GDP, measure whether and to what extent countries interact. And information flows include the number of internet users, cable television subscribers, number of radios per 1,000 people, and international newspapers traded. It's kind of similar to the technological connectivity in the AT Kearney Index, but yeah, definitely more detailed because it's all combined together under the social globalization. Okay. And also, cultural proximity is arguably the dimension of globalization most difficult to grasp. Yeah, according to one geographer, cultural globalization mostly refers to domination of U.S. cultural products. So, what's proximity? Like, how close you are to something, right? And that's why it's hard to to grasp because it's not physical. It depends on interpretation, but those interpretations have to be reasonable, okay, logical, based on geographical data. Yeah, domination U.S. products like McDonald's, located in a country. It also uses number of IKEA stores per country, like how deeply influenced are we by the others. Okay, so now we're gonna talk about world system analysis. Okay, so this world system analysis is one of the ways to describe cores and peripheries, and we have to know about that. Okay, so world system analysis is identified with Immanuel Wallerstein. You don't have to remember his name, but yeah, it's helpful. I don't think you have to, but then do remember it's been proposed in 1974, and is a way of looking at economic, social, and political development. So actually, it's easy to remember. Economic dimension, social dimension, political dimension in the COF index is the same over here. Okay, so in this way, for the COF index, you can for the globalization indices, one of each you have to remember. Just remember the COF index, and for the system analysis, you can the core and periphery system analysis. You can just remember the world system analysis. Okay, and it's easier to remember because those two connect. Okay, so I treat the whole world as a single unit. So any analysis of development must be seen as part of the overall capitalist world economy, not on a country by country approach. Yeah, so no, we're not gonna single out each of them. We're not gonna just focus on like Western ideas, Western development, because even IB geography is actually developed by Europeans, right? Is mostly British. Yeah. And then we're not gonna do that. We're not gonna do the country by country approach, but we're gonna see the world overall. Uh, and an approach which overlooked at individual countries in isolation was too simplistic and suffered from developmentalism. So that's like when you overlook, some countries like China and India, and like some less developed countries that had not participated in the core and peripheral like development scale before until recently. Sorry, wait. The developmentalism assumed that each country was economically and politically free, so it's like autonomous, like separated, isolated from other places. And also, all countries follow the same route to development, like the Western route. What happened in North America and Europe was best, and it would happen automatically everywhere. So this is ethnocentric, like centered, like focusing on particular ethnic group. So according to Wallerstein, a capital world system has three main characteristics: a global market, many countries which allow political and economic competition, and three tiers of countries. So actually, basically, they just mean the same things. So just remember global market and know what's happening in global market. Market, there's competition, right? A lot of countries allow political and economic competition, and three tiers of country. There's like, periphery, a core, largely MEDCs, and the periphery, which can be identified with LEDCs, and the semi-periphery. So the semi-periphery is a political label. It refers to those countries where there are less struggles and social change. So like Latin America, Eastern Europe in 1980s and 1990s. So core is the one that exerts influence, and periphery is the one surrounding it, as I have mentioned before. So that's basically the idea. Well, let's argue the capitalist development led to cycles of growth and stagnation. Okay, this is important. So one of the cycles is long-term economic cycle known as condrative cycle. So when you explain the world system analysis, always remember to explain the condrative cycle. This identifies cycles of depression at roughly 50 to 60 years intervals. The last two were in the 1920s to 30s and the late 1980s. Stagnation is important for the structuring of the world system and allows the semi-periphery to become involved in the development process. So just remember condrative cycle, it's like cycles of depression, so 50 to 60 years. It rises up, but then it falls down, so everything starts again. So that's why there are economic recessions. So this is like a pattern proposed by someone. So yeah, just don't say it proves anything or shows any property, but add it as like an evidence or like a support to your argument in your essay. And capitalism, according to world systems approach, include feudalism and socialism. So feudalism is kind of related to, medieval era after the Black Death, before the Black Death. There's like landlords, right? And the feudalism is talking about like how knights are employed, or not exactly employed, but then like the landlords provide food and stuff, and then knights are protecting the landlords. So feudalism is kind of like the capitalist system, how people are employed when they're given some financial benefits, they return it in their own way. So employment and providing work. And socialism is actually it's kind of related to capitalism. It's mainly talking about the mix of capitalism and the control of government. So a free market, no control of government, but then socialism there is still a degree, like a slight control of government in important matters to regulate the market. And there are extreme variations on the division of labor. As the world develops and changes, there will either be a swing towards a more socialist system or a transition towards a more unequal system. So there's like extreme variations of the division of labor. It's just like rich people, they just spend their money or like invest, but then poor people, like they're working so hard. So it's like the chain of command. If you see a company, the more higher up there is, like there's only one or two CEO and then a lot of normal workers, right? That's like division of labor. A lot of normal workers, a lot of them, their division of labor is very small and big, small and a lot. Yeah, but the other is not. So as the world develops, so we would see, so it's either this or that. Either like a lot more regulated development or a more unequal development, like the disparity between rich and poor. Yeah, so this is a map of core, semi-periphery, and periphery.